Assalamu alaikum guys. So in this video I want to share two things that every single Muslim should know about science. Now this would apply to the younger Muslims who are studying science in universities and in colleges, or even Muslims that are looking to become scientists. And by the way, this is something that should be encouraged. Number one, every Muslim should understand that science has certain principles, and one of its principles is that of methodological naturalism. Now, what is methodological naturalism? Methodological naturalism is the idea that whenever you look for an explanation in regards to a particular occurrence or a phenomenon or an observation or something you see or observe, that explanation has to be natural. You have to look for a natural explanation, a physical explanation, a material explanation, if you like. Now, just because science is limited to this principle, it doesn't mean that there aren't other types of explanations. What ends up happening sometimes is because you have this principle, it sometimes leads to the idea that the only type of explanations that exist are natural explanations, which is simply not true, and it's something we need to keep in mind. The second thing we should always keep in mind is that there is a underlying philosophy or an idea which still exists within the sphere of science today, especially amongst the atheist scientists, and they really push this a lot, especially people like Richard Dawkins. And that is that of scientism, this idea that science is the only way to truth. Now, this idea came to fruition in around the early 19th century, the 1920s, with the advent of the logical positivists. Now, these were a group of individuals that had these ideas and were pushing these ideas, which was science is the only way to truth, empirical data is the only data which is relevant. Anything beyond this is just doesn't exist, it's silly, they're just ideas. They have no power or substance. The only truths are those that science tells us about. Now, this idea has been debunked. It's self-refuting. If you say science is the only way to truth, how do you qualify that statement in the sphere of science? How do you measure that statement? You can't chuck it into a test tube and see the validity of that statement. So it refutes itself. If you say science is the only way to truth, well, then that statement is not true. Now, although that movement has died, what you still see today is amongst certain scientists, atheist scientists, that they still push this very idea. If you look back to some of Dawkins' videos, his books, he pushes this idea that scientific inquiry is the only real inquiry, scientific evidence is the only real evidence. So he's still pushing this idea, and this, sometimes if we don't know where this came from and the absurdity of such an idea, then it does end up affecting us and our minds as well. And we end up, and this is what you see, many scientists today, not all, at least maybe some, they would have this idea and they'll promote this idea, and they may not even be atheist. So these are the two things we need to keep in mind. There's many other things, but these are two fundamental things. If you can keep these in mind and understand these two things, then when you engage in the scientific sphere, you engage in the science, you do the science, you become a scientist, you won't be affected because you understand now as to what these things are. And just to conclude, I think Muslims, like I said earlier, Muslims should be involved in the sciences. To seek knowledge, to seek especially knowledge of the world that we live in, to observe the world and study the world. This is something Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala encourages us to do as Muslims in the Quran. He tells us to observe the world, His creation, because His creation is His sign. It points us back towards Him. So, as a Muslim, at least as Muslims, we should keep an open mind when we do the science, as opposed to having a very narrow, restricted way of doing science. The more we study God's world, the more we study His signs, the closer we will become to God. And this is something beautiful. So I conclude on this. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Until next time, take care.